West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
From city high-rises to country villas, investigators are looking closely at Donald Trump's real estate empire, his taxes, and the financing of it all. A key figure in the Manhattan District Attorney's probe, the man who handled the Trump finances, longtime Trump Organization Chief Financial Officer Allen Weisselberg. NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter spoke exclusively with Weisselberg's former daughter-in-law, who's offering insight into Trump's top money man, his family, and the ongoing investigation.
For 14 years until 2018, Jennifer Weisselberg was married to a son of Trump Organization Chief Financial Officer Allen Weisselberg.
Allen Weisselberg is defined by what Donald thinks about him, about saving him money regardless, every day, proving his worth by doing that creatively.
What do you think he could tell investigators?
Everything they would ask.
Do you think he could be the ultimate tour guide into the Trump orbit?
Yes.
She says she gained her own insights into the Trump orbit before her marriage to Barry Weisselberg ended in a bitter divorce. From visiting Trump's signature golf courses to her front row seat at the 2016 presidential inaugural, she says the Weisselberg family has been loyal to Donald Trump and he's been good to them. Her ex-husband Barry managing Trump's ice rinks in New York's Central Park. And she believed that in 2004, Trump and Melania gave them a big wedding gift, their own apartment overlooking the park. So you thought that the apartment you were living in was a gift? This is a congratulations?
I wrote them a thank you note.
And all along, it was just a corporate Trump Organization apartment?
I didn't understand these things. I was a ballet dancer. Come on.
In reality, Trump didn't give them the apartment. He let them live there rent-free, paying only for utilities, an arrangement that could raise legal and tax questions about how the Weisselbergs and the Trump Organization accounted for it. When the arrangement was reported last fall, it caught the attention of Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance's office. The prosecutor who went all the way to the Supreme Court and got Trump's tax returns, now in the thick of a grand jury investigation. How many times have you specifically talked with the Manhattan District Attorney's office?
Multiple times.
Okay.
And it's not over.
She declined to detail her conversations with investigators and is speaking out as her long and bitter divorce case is still playing out in court. She's already lost custody of her kids.
I have no reason to be here except that I am not a woman who is willing to live a life of secrecy out of fear any longer. They will out-resource me in the courts forever. And I have tried to be graceful, and I have tried to handle this privately. And they are not agreeing to do so at all. What choice do I have, Tom?
You want your kids back?
Yes. That's why I'm here.
There are going to be people that watch this and listen to you and hear the words that you say and are going to think this is somebody who is after their ex-husband, or this is somebody who has an axe to grind against a family. How do you respond to those people?
I can't care anymore what people think. I know who I am. My kids know who I am. People that love me know who I am, and I'm absolutely wish that I personally didn't have the attachment to somebody that has the same ethics as the Trump-Weisselberg family.
Jennifer says there's good reason prosecutors are so interested in what her former father-in-law knows.
Alan would not take an hour or day off if Donald was in the office, because I think he felt like he had to be there all the time, but also they are a team. His office is right next door. He discusses everything with him.
Attorneys for Alan Weisselberg had no comment. Now, Vance's office is plowing through several million pages of Trump's financial documents, the vast majority of those filings overseen by Alan Weisselberg. It could be months before prosecutors determine whether charges should be filed.
And Tom Winter joins us now live. Tom, good morning. Obviously, Alan Weisselberg is a pivotal figure in all of this. He knows where all the proverbial bodies are buried in the Trump organization. But you're zeroing in on that apartment on Central Park West that your guest told you about was a wedding gift from Donald and Melania Trump. Why is that significant?
Well, I think it's one of the pieces of, if you think of this investigation as a highway, and there's a bunch of different lanes on this highway that investigators will try to go down to figure out whether or not they eventually charge anybody or how many people they charge and for what. And I think that this is one of the pieces of one of those lanes. So, you know, when you look at an apartment, was it properly accounted for? Donald Trump's signature is on the apartment when it was eventually sold in 2014. So the president, the former president, directly signed it. So you have to wonder, was it correctly accounted for in the Trump organization? We asked those questions. Was it appropriately accounted for by the Weisselbergs, and how did this all kind of get put together? It's just one of the things when you've heard Cy Vance talk about this case through his court filings in the lead up to the Supreme Court case, it's that kind of that tax bracket in whether or not assets were valued correctly. I think that this might fall into, Willie.
Tom, do we know whether Alan Weisselberg has asked for or been offered immunity?
It's a great question, Mike. I asked a series of questions of Alan Weisselberg's attorneys yesterday. As you heard of the piece, they said no comment. So at this point, I haven't heard that that's been the case. And we asked whether or not they might cooperate or might seek to talk to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I think at this point, Mike, time will tell.
It is Friday, the 19th of March of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Oh, yes, we deserve it. We lasted the week, though I must confess, the week seemed to be tremendously more restful compared to the previous 4 years of weeks. So, yeah, it's great, and that's not to say that we haven't had uproar enough, especially when considering the tragedy in Atlanta. And I guess we're picking at the scab of that systemic racism that exists in our society that we want to ignore. Right after George Floyd was murdered for the world to see, Black Lives Matter approval ratings went up in polls. And of course, the propaganda about how bad those people are has eroded that popularity rating somewhat over the intervening time. And I think what is being exposed now in Atlanta about this racism, specifically against Asians, but generally, is having a similar effect. People are appalled at this terrible bigotry that's manifested itself in these terrible murders. And but I also see the usual suspects working hard already to erode those sentiments. And you don't have to look any further than Chip Roy from Texas. Talk about an unreconstructed racist lyncher. Jeez. You know, I did post on social media, and I wish there was an edit button on Twitter. Because the syntax in my sentence actually kind of meant a little bit different than what I was trying to get across. But essentially what I was trying to say is that why would anyone be surprised that a guy like Chip Roy, who is a racist lyncher, would want to apologize for pushing lynching during an anti-Asian lynching committee hearing. It's just appalling. And then when called out on it, of course, he doubled down and said, look, I want to lynch everyone I can. I'm from Texas. I would think that there's a lot of people in Texas, and I know a lot of them, who think that Chip Roy should shut the fuck up. Is that cancel culture? Damn right it is. Man, we had Joe Walsh online going, hey, what about all those hippies from the 60s and 70s? What about free speech, free expression, la, 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 la? Well, you know what? Cancel culture, as he says, why don't you fight against cancer, girl? Cancel culture. Cancel culture is a made-up trope by right-wing squares who cannot stand the truth. They cannot take it. Woke cancel culture is just the PC culture of its day. It's just some way to kick the liberals and give an excuse for right-wingers to not have to be good neighbors. PC culture, the derision of PC culture back in the day was just because a bunch of bad neighbors didn't want to be good neighbors. Same thing with this woke cancel culture. Bunch of right-wing squares can't stand the truth, don't want to be good neighbors, and there's no way you could force them. Well, you don't force someone to be a good neighbor, but you can, I guess, build a fence. Keep them at bay. Jeez, you know, we used to have these open plains. You know, hey, hi neighbor, wave at your neighbor from a mile away across all this open expanse. Now it turns out your neighbor might be some kind of crazy loon that you're going to see on an FBI wanted poster. You want to build a wall between that's for sure. Yeah, I've mentioned this before. You know, urban planning was such that all of our front yards were open to the street. It was an expression or an example of our open democracy, our free society. But because you got a bunch of anti-American lunatics, well, they want to build a wall around themselves. And I say let them. In fact, we'll call it a gated community. They can feel special, but we'll keep a guard in a shack out front. Okay? And only certain people can come and go. Yeah. We'll give them their own little shopping mall with a golf course and a little fountain. Maybe a lake. We'll have a lake with a fountain in the middle of the lake. And we'll call it their gated community, and we can keep them all there. All right? And it'll already be gerrymandered. We can stack them all in there and give them whatever representative they want, and then the rest of us can get the work done, like repairing our bridges. Yeah, I think Infrastructure Week's going to take a little bit more than a week. After all of that deferred maintenance, decades of it, well, we have so much going on today. Well, you know, we curate a show here, so I try to pick out the stories that may have slipped through the cracks, so to speak, or ones that aren't so necessarily obvious, but sometimes you can't escape the obvious. You can't. Well, with that said, what is on the rest of the menu here? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, at the top, that was Trump's accountant's former daughter-in-law dishing on how the family business is really run. And she's kind of angry. I really hate these divorce battles in which, one of the parties loses custody of the kids. I really think that that's horrific. It really is. They're using their kids as a rope in a tug-of-war. Apparently with no concern about the impact it's going to have on their kids. But I guess if you've been in the Trump orbit, would that really be a concern after all? Anyway, this woman lost her kids. So I guess when you bump up against, well, we just call it the maternal instinct, but I like to say, hey, she's a mom. Maternal instinct, same thing, I know. You might suffer the consequences. Even from being in the Trump purview and the supposed largesse bestowed upon you. And I say supposed largesse because seemed like it was largesse, but it was only supposed. Because, after all, we're dealing with the Trumps here, okay? Gild this. Take away a woman's children, and I think that maybe she might want to expose a few things. Do you think get back is just getting the back? No, you're getting the back of the hand and a few things more. Maybe a spiked heel right in the nuts. So, yeah, she had a few things to say. And we'll see how things were accounted for, won't we? Yes, we will. Finally. On the rest of the menu, a federal appeals court reinstated the conviction of a Flynn business partner. You know that Russian hoax? The only hoax about the Russian hoax was calling the Russia investigation a hoax. Because people are going to jail for effing up America. All right? And good thing, too. The Department of Justice charged a Swiss hacktivist for data theft 1 week after he bragged about it online. Well, that'll get you in trouble. And the House dismissed a Republican attempt to remove California Representative Eric Swalwell from the House Intelligence Panel for helping the FBI bust a Chinese spy ring 6 years ago. I guess they're trying to get rid of him because he helped the FBI. Obviously, he can't be objective. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Turkish police detained top officials of the Kurdish Peoples Democratic Party, along with the head of the country's most respected human rights group. And the U.S. accused the Chinese of grandstanding and violating protocol after fiery exchanges in their first face-to-face meeting. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, though she is very busy in real life. So thank you, Kelly, for taking care of us. And if you would then take a look across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice, hopefully, you will notice the Patreon link. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you are able to, send us the equivalent of what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink. If you could send those funds to us once a month, we stretch those dollars beyond compare. And we have a lot of experience. 10 years. It's our 10th year anniversary this year, indeed. And this month, too. And so good. Well, actually, it was last month, the end of last month, but it took us a couple of weeks to get our feet under us, so to speak. And we've been doing this now 24/7, 365 for 10 years. And we have you to thank, because though the bulk of how we do this comes out of our own wallets, we would not be able to do it without you. So, indeed, we have stretched those dollars, as I mentioned, beyond compare. On the quantum level, too, we leave no strange quark unstretched. Then, with those funds matched with the funds that we have out of our own wallets, hey, yeah, we pay our bills. And apparently, in this construct of material world and existence, when you pay your bills, you can sometimes fly under the radar and get away with a lot of stuff, like resisting Nazis. And that's our prime directive, indeed. Our mission statement is love as many people as you can, but always kick the Nazis. You gotta. Otherwise, look what happens. We're looking at it right now. And with your generosity, we've been able to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, oh, so many years ago. And I don't mean 10. I mean, way back. So thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and he is so busy in real life, too. But thank you, Tom, for taking care of us also. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, do so at Justice Putnam, N before the M. All right. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who they are. Do check out the show notes and links diary. It's the comprehensive reportage in which we draw all of this. Well, is it analysis? I don't know what to call it. Well, it could be, Science 3000. We used to sit in front of news shows when we were kids, when we lived in the Cascades, way up. and you only had a few stations, and you didn't have very many to begin with. But when you're way up, you have to be within what they call eyesight of a tower somewhere. But we used to turn the sound off and make up our own dialogues to any number of shows, news shows. They didn't have to just be movies. So that's kind of like what we're doing now, kind of. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart, iTunes, everywhere. Pick up a podcast. They're everywhere. All right, it's Friday, and I assure you we have not dipped into the French 77s yet. Did you know that we are Nighthawks in the diner of life? And the French 77 is the cocktail of choice. The most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktailing, by the way. Indeed. So, but they're potent spirits, and we don't imbibe so early because we have the whole day ahead of us. Okay, how did people survive with the 3 cocktail lunch? I tried that once. Yeah, you're sleeping. You don't want to be working around heavy machinery, I'll say that. Okay, let's tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because we still have the chef's table coming up. And this is out of the Associated Press by Matthew Barricott. A federal appeals court reinstated the conviction of a one-time business partner, a former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, for acting as an unregistered agent of the Turkish government. A jury in Alexandria convicted Bijan Kian at a 2019 trial. After the conviction, though, the trial judge, Anthony Trenga, intervened and overturned the conviction. Isn't that weird how that happened a lot? Even right down to pardons on the presidential level. Now, Trengen ruled that there was no way a rational jury could have concluded from the evidence that Kian was a foreign agent acting under the control of Turkey. Really? Are you kidding me? Well, let's get back to the actual reportage, shall we? Prosecutors' trial plans were thrown into disarray on the eve of the trial when they opted against putting Flynn on the stand, even though he had been expected to be their star witness. Flynn acknowledged in a separate case that he made false statements about work he performed that benefited Turkey. He had hoped at one point that his cooperation with prosecutors in Kian's case would help him receive a lighter sentence in his own case, but he later sought to rescind his guilty plea and stopped cooperating with prosecutors. The case spun off from special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian election interference. Remember when they kept saying there was no evidence, no proof, and Robert Mueller proved there was no evidence? They actually arrested people. They actually charged people that they had no real expectation to arrest because, well, they were sitting at the dining table of Vladimir Putin over there in FSB headquarters in Moscow. But they were indicted nonetheless. And guess what? There's a few long-time sleeper cell types that got busted here. Prosecutors allege Kian and Flynn were acting at Turkey's behest when they undertook a project to discredit an exiled cleric, Fethullah Gulen, a Turkish cleric living in the U.S. Yeah, Pennsylvania, to be exact. Kian and Flynn were partners in the Flynn Intel Group. Gulen had been sought for extradition by Turkish President Erdogan, who blames Gulen for an attempted coup in that country. And that may be true, but so what? Flynn wrote a November 2016 op-ed piece comparing Gulen to former Iranian leader Khomeini. Well, why don't you just say bin Laden? And prosecutors said Turkey directed the effort through a middleman, businessman Kamil Alptekin, and pointed to a series of irregular payments flowing back and forth between Kian and Alptekin. Trenga, though, said in his ruling, there is no substantial evidence that Alptekin agreed to cooperate and operate as subject to the direction and control of the Turkish government, and that there was no competent evidence that Alptekin was an intermediary for the Turkish government. But the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, in a unanimous ruling, said Trenga should have been more deferential to the jury. Judge James Wynn, an Obama appointee, wrote that the trial judge gave insufficient deference to the almost invariable assumption of the law that the jury was capable of following its instructions. Judges Paul Niemeyer, G.H.W. Bush appointee, and Barbara Milano Keenan, an Obama appointee, joined in Wynn's opinion. The appeals court also rejected granting Kian, also known as Bijan Rafikian, a new trial. So if the ruling is not appealed, Kian's case will go back to Alexandria for sentencing. Kian's lawyers did not respond to a request for comment yesterday, Thursday, because why would they? They never do. Maybe we'll hear about it on Monday, maybe. In a statement, Raj Parekh, acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, whose office prosecuted the case, praised the ruling and said the appellate court's careful legal analysis confirmed the broad scope and importance of the disclosure requirements for individuals acting within the United States at the direction of foreign governments. In other words, we're perfectly happy having you tell us that you're just a lobbyist for a hostile foreign power. But if you don't tell us that, you're going to be charged as a spy. Matt O'Brien of the AP brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Justice Department has charged a Swiss hacker with computer intrusion and identity theft just over a week after the hacker took credit for helping to break into the online systems of a U.S. security camera startup. An indictment against 21-year-old Till Kottman was brought yesterday, Thursday, by a grand jury in the Seattle-based Western District of Washington. Federal prosecutors said that Kottman of Lucerne, Switzerland, was initially charged in September. The range of allegations date back to 2019 and involve stealing credentials and data and publishing source code and proprietary information from more than 100 entities, including companies and government agencies. Kottman had described the most recent hack and leak of camera footage from customers of California security camera provider Verkada as part of a hacktivist cause of exposing the dangers of mass surveillance. Acting U.S. Attorney Teresa Gorman rejected those motives. These actions can increase vulnerabilities for everyone from large corporations to individual consumers. Wrapping oneself in an allegedly altruistic motive does not remove the criminal stench from such intrusion, theft, and fraud. Kottman did not immediately return an online request for comment on Thursday. Do you think they still let him have access to a computer? Now, Swiss authorities said they had raided Kottman's home in Lucerne late last week at the request of U.S. authorities. It is not clear if U.S. prosecutors intend to extradite him, as he remains in Lucerne and was notified of the pending charges. Okay, so he still does have a computer, maybe. Prosecutors said the FBI recently seized a website domain that Kottman used to publish hacked data online. Now, I suppose if you're hacking into individuals' homes and you're watching them move about in their private moments, I don't think that's an altruistic motive. That's being a voyeur, and I don't know, maybe even a blackmailer. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. I think that, I've heard, I read a quick blurb here before we started the show that Kevin McCarthy is very, very upset about this because the House has dismissed a Republican attempt to remove Swalwell from the House Intel panel over his contact more than 6 years ago with a suspected Chinese spy who targeted politicians in the U.S. Democrats scuttled the effort from House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy 218 to 200 after he forced a vote. His resolution against Swalwell cited information first reported by Axios that the suspected spy, Christine Fang, came into contact with Swalwell's campaign as he was first running for Congress in 2012. She also participated in fundraising for his 2014 campaign and helped place an intern in his office. Federal investigators alerted Swalwell to the concerns and briefed Congress about Fang in 2015, at which point Swalwell cut off contact with her, and authorities have not charged him with any wrongdoing because he gave him all the info. Once he was made aware, he said, "Oh my God, here's what has happened." Now, juxtapose that to Flynn. Juxtapose that to every single character in Trump's orbit. Every single one lied. Every single one covered it up. Why? Because they are working for a hostile foreign power. And now Kevin McCarthy, to prove that they're a family, a mob family, is to go after a guy investigating them. Swalwell knows that they're, at best, I don't know, do we call them traitors? I know we haven't, I've mentioned this before, I know we haven't declared war on Russia, but Vlad declared war on us. I guess if you say asymmetrical warfare is warfare, some people say it's not. Well, Swalwell followed the law. And for that, he's going to be held up like a bloody shirt. Look, we have our spy on their side too. House Intel Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said in a letter to colleagues on yesterday, that Swalwell, quote, is a trusted member of our committee, end quote, and that he had acted fully in accordance with his responsibilities after the 2015 counter-intel briefing. Schiff said that Republican leaders, including then House Speaker John Boehner, and the then chairman of the Intel panel, Republican Representative Devin Nunes, were briefed on the situation at the time and expressed no opposition to his continued service on the committee because maybe they hadn't gotten to Nunes yet. And when I say they, I mean the ones who write contracts in Cyrillic. McCarthy requested his own briefing about Swalwell after the Axios report in December. After the briefing, which was also attended by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, McCarthy said he thought Swalwell should be removed. The Republican resolution comes as the once bipartisan Intel panel deals with the raw feelings left by the investigations into former Donald Trump's ties to Russia. While Schiff and Nunes once worked together, the Trump era shattered that as the panel became one of the most divided in all of Congress. Well, no wonder. One side was working hand in glove with Vladimir Putin to destroy democracy so they could hold on to power, and the other party was just trying to follow the law and keep America America. Well, that brings us to our break, and why don't we? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Lady Sings the Truth. Despite her 20th century fame, not a lot is known about Billie Holiday's real backstory. Indeed, when asked about claims in her own autobiography, she said, "I never read that book." Lee Daniels, The United States versus Billie Holiday, may not get everything right, but it is on point concerning the unceasing FBI harassment she endured literally to her deathbed. It's debatable that they were motivated by her anti-lynching anthem, Strange Fruit, as posited here, but from what is known of J. Edgar Hoover, it can't be ruled out. Holiday, as portrayed here, is the epitome of a tortured artist. Despite possessing an amazing voice and loads of charisma, Holiday struggled with drug addiction, toxic partners, and bad decisions. Despite her faults, though, the racial and political targeting she endured was untoward. Racist FBI agent Harry Anslinger, a holdover from Prohibition, targets her under the guise of the war on drugs and the additional pretext of the Strange Fruit song. Adding to the plot is a black undercover FBI agent who befriends Holiday but ultimately betrays her. Watching this one, the thought occurs that at the writing stage, the producers may not have known what they had in their untested lead, Andra Day. She's an R&B R&B singer not only with singing chops but with acting ability, portraying going from glamorous to strung out in a way that belies her experience. Known earlier, a better movie may have emerged, with more emphasis on Holiday's life and art and less on the politics. The recent Judas and the Black Messiah kinda just went there. Day is the real reason to watch this, and she's already won the Best Actress Golden Globe. The United States versus Billie Holiday likely takes the liberties many biopics do. Nonetheless, it's worth a watch. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60 Seconds Science. I'm Mark Stratton.
Have you ever done something for someone else, knowing that your actions would solely benefit them and not you? Maybe you opened a door, or donated blood, or volunteered in a hospital's ER during the pandemic. This is called a pro-social behavior. Caregiving, group coordination, conflict resolution, sharing. Humans engage in these types of behaviors all the time. We've learned that it's a large part of the reason we've succeeded as a species. But a major question remains in science. Are we the only species who do this? As one of our closest relatives, chimpanzees have long been studied for signs of this. Their genetic similarities could help us tease out the evolutionary trajectory of the desire to selflessly help others. So far, research has provided mixed results on the question. Studies of these animals in the wild and captivity seem to come to different conclusions. Some studies show that chimps cooperatively hunt, share food, and console each other. But one highly cited study came to a very different conclusion. It said chimpanzees are indifferent to the welfare of others. The study used what's called a pro-social choice test, a controlled lab experiment where chimpanzees in enclosures were given two options: push a button to give food to themselves, or push the button to give food to themselves and a partner chimp. If they chose the latter, it was seen as a pro-social behavior. In that study, chimps showed no special preferences for feeding themselves and a friend over feeding just themselves. Enter new research and a remote juice fountain.
We installed a button and a concrete fountain into the chimpanzees' outdoor enclosures. The fountain was then hooked up to a large container of juice placed outside of the enclosure. When an individual pushes the button, it releases juice from the fountain. However, since the button and fountain are approximately 5 meters apart, the individual pushing cannot directly drink from the fountain, and if any other chimpanzees are at the fountain when the button is pushed, they, and not the pusher, will be able to drink the juice.
That's Sarah Detroit of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, Leipzig. Compared to previous controlled lab-based experiments, the setup for this was very naturalistic, and Detroit says chimpanzees were able to interact with the fountain in their social groups. In this context, they discovered a willingness to act in the interest of others, with individual chimpanzees prepared to activate the fountain without benefiting themselves.
We found that many of the chimpanzees were willing to pro-socially provide valuable resources to the group members, even if they couldn't benefit themselves from their behavior. And this behavior also increased over time. We can't, of course, know what the chimpanzees' actual reasons or motivations for pushing the button were. But the fact that they were willing, over the course of 2 months, to repeatedly perform an action from which they had very little direct benefits is really fascinating and displays a high capacity for pro-social behavior.
The degree of this pro-social behavior varied among 3 different groupings of chimps who were tested. They observed how groups who were more socially tolerant and felt comfortable around group members when in competitive situations were more likely to behave pro-socially, particularly more towards group members for whom they have an existing bond, namely kinship.
Our finding that chimpanzees can indeed behave pro-socially, and moreover show group differences in their behavior, suggests that there's a lot we don't yet know about their sociality. We might be more similar than we thought. and prosociality might have had a stronger role in shaping chimpanzee social behavior than previously assumed. We need more research to better understand the extent of chimpanzee prosociality, which will be able to inform us about the evolutionary past of our own unique human sociality.
Further research may reveal what lies behind their pro-social motivations. But for now, it's safe to assume that chimpanzees are not simply, and you'll forgive the pun, aping human behavior. Their research is featured in the journal Science Advances.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Mark Stratton.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seat belts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seat belts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Voter fraud myth fuels GOP drive to rewrite laws. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute, and that was a recent New York Times headline for the story widely reported. The Republicans countrywide are mounting extraordinary efforts to legislate voter suppression. Last November, there was record voter turnout across the United States and no fraud. Nevertheless, state legislatures across the country are pushing to enact laws that will make it much more difficult to vote by eliminating no-excuse absentee ballots and otherwise constructing numerous other obstacles to absentee voting, by minimizing early voting days and reducing the number of hours polls are open on Election Day, creating long lines, and effectively eliminating voting places in neighborhoods of color, and by closing popular voting places like college campuses and voting centers, and by ending automatic voter registration at motor vehicle offices, and by curtailing early voting on Sundays when many African Americans vote after church. The racism is palpable. The justification for this overt voter suppression is the big lie that the 2020 election somehow was stolen from Donald Trump, the remedy for which is to ensure that certain people, particularly people of color and other marginalized communities, don't vote again. The consequences of a successful legislative push for voter suppression would be dire. As a Democratic state senator in Iowa summarized, on this path, we're not going to have a working democracy. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
When corporate executives are absurdly hypocritical yet so obtuse that they don't even realize it, is it still hypocrisy or are they just dim-witted? Consider the histrionics emanating from corporate bunkers over rising public approval for the idea that nature might be given legal rights that are enforceable in courts. The Rights of Nature movement argues that if, say, a mining conglomerate decapitates a mountain, that injured citizen of our natural world ought to have its day in court. Outrageous, shriek the honchos of corporate America. The courts are for people, not for pieces of property. Hello, hypocrisy. After all, a corporation is not a person. It has no brain, no pulse, no soul, no life. It's not even a real piece of property, just an inert document printed by a state. Yet, the owners of that piece of paper claim that it magically bestows personhood on their syndicate, giving it the legal and political rights of real people. Yet these paper people now cry that Earth's actual living creatures can't have any legal rights because they're just property. Excuse me, but a single drop of water has more life in it than all the corporations in the world. Also, let's note that the long evolution of law even had to be enlightened to recognize that such property as slaves were human beings with fundamental rights. The body of legal and moral rights has grown, and it enhances our own humanity to recognize that we and nature are one. Crass corporate exploitation, on the other hand, diminishes all living things, threatening life itself. This is Jim Hightower saying, those who mock the idea of legal standing for marshes, grasslands, forest networks, and other wildlife might consider taking a moment by a quiet stream in the woods to ponder the question, does nature need us, or do we need her?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day the United States Supreme Court upheld the Adamson Act. The act had initially been passed and signed into law the previous September to avoid a nationwide railway strike. It established the 8-hour workday and overtime pay for interstate railroad workers. The 4 railroad brotherhoods, the engineers, firemen, brakemen, and conductors, had been pushing for these terms since at least 1915. When the railroads refused to budge, the unions prepared to strike. It was the first federal law that sought to determine minimum wages and maximum hours for private industry. The railroads were furious with President Woodrow Wilson for demanding quick passage of the law. They filed the case Wilson versus New, which challenged the constitutionality of the act. The railroads refused to abide by the new law while they waited for their case to be heard, ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 4 railroad brotherhoods grew tired of waiting and organized for another strike. The court rejected the railroads' claim and upheld the act. President Wilson had hoped to ensure labor peace as the United States was on the cusp of entering World War I. Seen as a powerful victory for the unions, the railway employees pressed for similar demands. When the industry looked as though it was headed for yet another strike, President Wilson exercised the Army Appropriations Act and issued an executive order at the end of 1917 that placed the railroads under federal control. This nationalized the railroad industry into 3 divisions under the newly established United States Railroad Administration between the years of 1917 and 1920. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and looks like we should be a bit cooler than yesterday. Only highs in the upper 40s to low 50s. Winds out of the southwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, so continuing its brisk blowing briskly. Partly cloudy skies this evening will give way to an occasional shower overnight, bringing with it a little less than a quarter of an inch into tomorrow, and we should have lows in the mid to low 30s, with winds continuing out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and rain showers early tomorrow, Saturday, with some sunshine later in the day, with highs in the low 50s. Winds continuing at that brisk 5 to 10. Now, confirmed cases of coronavirus are now standing at 8,882, with deceased confirmed at 120. So that deceased number is unchanged. The confirmed cases of infections have increased by a few. I expect it to go over 9,000 by Monday, Tuesday. Pollen right outside the window here in Rogue River proper is rated at none. The air quality index for the region is good at 34 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is moderate and ticked back up to 5. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.11 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 52 and partly cloudy. Paris is 48 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 54 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 39 and also partly cloudy. Kabul is 57 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 54 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 69 with a rain shower, so I guess they have clouds. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and they are very cloudy. And New York is a brisk 33 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous Reuters staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Turkish police detained 3 district heads of the pro-Kurdish Peoples Democratic Party and 7 others in Istanbul today over alleged links to militants, police said, 2 days after a court case began over banning the party. Separately, Turkey's Human Rights Association co-chairman Öztürk Türkdoğan was arrested by police at his home and prompting human rights groups to call for his release. There was no official statement why he was held. A prosecutor filed a case with the Constitutional Court on Wednesday demanding a ban on the Kurdish Party, the culmination of a years-long crackdown against Parliament's third largest party, and the Kurdish Party called it a political coup.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more anonymous Reuters staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Senior Chinese officials meeting face-to-face with counterparts from the Biden administration for the first time yesterday, Thursday, seem to have come intent on grandstanding and violating protocol, a senior U.S. official said after firing opening exchanges and talks in Alaska. The official told reporters that in advance of the talks, the two sides had agreed to short 2-minute public opening statements, but these ended up lasting more than an hour. The Chinese delegation seems to have arrived intent on grandstanding, focused on public theatrics and dramatics over substance. They made that clear by promptly violating protocol, said the official. The leader of the Chinese delegation, Beijing's top diplomat Yang Jiechi, in turn accused the U.S. of not respecting diplomatic protocol by announcing sanctions against Chinese officials ahead of the meeting. Well. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. And you do know we'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.